Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Garden Report back from Indianapolis. On to the NBA Finals. Drew Carter is here to get into it. And Drew, first year calling Celtics games, NBA Finals. How about that?
It's funny how things just work out sometimes, B-Man. Thanks for having me on. When the Celtics traded for Drew Holiday, it was around the same time that I knew I was getting the job, and I was like, "Wow, this could happen. This team could win a championship the first year I'm working with them." So that'd be pretty neat.
Yeah, and so we don't have a matchup here yet, but it seems imminent. Celtics Mavericks. Mavs lose last night, which extends it a little bit, which I'm fine with. I want as many games going on
Dude,
here
thank
because we
God.
have
Thank
10
God.
days.
What are we supposed to do for the next week and a half if we don't have that series to watch? And inside the NBA.
Yeah, for sure, that too. And I'll take a 6 game there if that's what it comes to. But I wanted Mavs Celtics at first, or Wolves Celtics at first, because I like the contrast of like the Celtics offense and the Wolves defense, and I just felt like it would have been a fascinating series personality wise. But I actually have come around on the Brown Tatum versus Luka Kyrie thing, the way that Mavs team has looked throughout this run here, and even just the Dallas component. Like I'm excited to go down to Dallas and check that out. So this to me is becoming an intriguing matchup here, as it looks like it's going to be the imminent one. And I guess since the Celtics would probably be favored over them or the Wolves at this point, a lot of people pick Denver to be that favorite this year or the Celtics. So now that it's the Celtics versus one of these two teams, kind of feels like title or bust at this point. Like you got it. It's great you won the East. It's great you had this run you did here. And I think the players felt the same way that you have to get it done at this point.
I think it's been title or bust for a long time. Ever since they brought in Porzingis and Drew. To me, it was always title or bust, regardless of matchup. Even if we played Denver in the finals, I think that would still be the case. This Celtics team was so dominant in the regular season, doing things that are rarely seen in the modern NBA. I mean, going into a finals with 20 losses total is pretty rare. I think Bill Simmons tweeted it. There've been maybe 7 teams to do that, 7 or 8, and they all won the title except the Warriors, who won 73 that year. They lost to LeBron, and even that, some stuff goes differently. That they could easily win that series. So I think once we saw this team fully formed and saw how seamlessly Holiday and Porzingis fit, combined with how successful they've been in the last almost decade, making 6 of the last 8 conference finals, I think it's always been title or bust. Now that doesn't mean that Minnesota or Dallas isn't going to present a huge challenge. They will, but I still think the Celtics should be favored. And it's the same thing it's been all season, where they have to win a championship or else the season won't be a success. I don't think that's anything new.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the mindset they did going into the season with this group. And I think just the matchup here makes it a little bit more of the case because going up against Denver, it's the defending champs. It's Jokic. He felt inevitable at a certain point this year. So I would have at least looked at it if they lost to Denver and been like, especially, it would have been a way they lost to Denver in my mind. Like if it went to a 7th game down the stretch and he hits one of those Jokic flip shots at the buzzer, it's
Yeah,
like,
or if Murray hits like a ridiculous fadeaway 20-footer. Yeah.
yeah, and it's going to be similar in this series, I feel like, too. Like, how's it going to look? And that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around right now because first round, I give Miami the benefit of the doubt because it's Miami. And we know how Celtics Heats goes. But the Heat just get so injured. By the 5th game, they have 3 rotation guys out, and they just fade away. And, credit to the Celtics for taking care of business there. But it is what it is injury-wise. Round 2, similar deal. It looks like the Cavs are going to really compete, push that 6, maybe even 7 games, and then Mitchell goes down, and it's like, ooh, there you go. Allen never plays in that series. And now, 3rd round, Halliburton goes down. It becomes a sweep. Very competitive sweep, almost like a Brooklyn 2022 style sweep. But the path has been favorable for the Celtics to this point. There's no doubt about it. And now I'm just imagining what this Dallas series is going to look like, or Minnesota, if there's history made here. And it's like, all right, Lively's out probably here. We'll see what happens there with the neck injury, but it's a pretty much fully formed Mavericks team. And that's going to be a little different than some of the previous rounds here. I know Luka's a little banged up too here, but to me, it's going to be a real series. It's going to be a longer series. It's going to be a series with some amount of drama, which hasn't been the case to this point so far, at least in terms of like, ooh, the Celtics could lose this. They actually have to like play out a full series here against a fully loaded team.
Yeah, the drama, I think the drama is the key word, because I've been trying to put my finger on it, and it doesn't it hasn't really felt like a
The
playoff
playoffs.
game. It hasn't felt that way at different times during the playoffs. And I'm not saying like the crowd isn't loud enough or whatever. I'm not going to hop on that narrative, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, we've both been in the building. I think at times it's been eerily quiet when when the Celtics aren't playing well, but to me the pops have been huge, and I think the crowds have actually been pretty good. So that's not why I say that. It's more what you said about there's not a lot of drama, not much suspense. It's more like, wow, if the Celtics don't win this, it'll be a disaster, but they should. Now going into this series, I don't have that feeling at all. Like I actually do think it's up in the air. And like I said, I think the Celtics should be the favorites, and they will be. But you look at what each of these teams have put out there, and I'm not writing off Minnesota. I know it's never happened before, but
I'm not either.
They got game 5 at home, and they should have the edge there, even though they haven't been very good at home this playoffs. But they got game 5 at home. Game 6, all the pressure would be on Dallas, and then game 7, anything can happen. I'd like not to sound like Kevin Millar here, but game 7, anything can happen. And you said Lively, dude. I think that's such a huge loss for them. Like, Daniel Gafford is one of my favorite players, so I've been late to acknowledge this, but Lively is their best center.
I've never heard someone say Daniel Gafford's one of my favorite players.
He's just Bobby. I think he's awesome to watch, and he's really fun to listen to as well. I think he's got a really good sense of himself and his role. And I just love the fact that he was basically thrown a life preserver from the sinking Wizards ship, and here he is, and he's contributing and probably going to be playing in the finals. I love watching him play, and I love Lively as well. And so if they don't have him, it really throws a wrench into their whole 2-center system, which to me has been one of the coolest stories of the playoffs, is how Jayson Kidd platoons those guys. And then Lively is a rookie, a young rookie at that, with his playmaking, in addition to all the stuff that's kind of obvious when you watch him, the rim running and the protection of the rim on the other side. So his playmaking has been huge, and they lose that when he's not in there. So if Lively is really out, and by the way, neck sprain, really? I mean, it kind of feels like we're covering the NFL at this point, and
yeah,
they want to. And I don't know. I don't have any inside intel, but to me, for that to be a neck sprain, it's a little surprising. But if they don't have him, they could have problems in game 5, and then all of a sudden, you better win game 6, or else all the belief is going to be on the side of Minnesota. So I do not think that series is over by any means. They better put him away last night, like Anthony Edwards was saying on that mic'd up.
Then he was great. Big shot, long 2 down the stretch there.
Yeah.
Cat hit all those threes.
Was that the longest 2 of the season, by the way? I think he had like 3 toes on the line.
In honor of Kevin Garnett, right?
Yeah. Daryl Morey is Daryl Morey is rolling over. He's losing sleep over the fact that was a mid-range, not a 3.
I 100% agree with this not being over. Especially Luka just looks hobbled out there, which isn't great.
Isn't it weird?
Yeah. Where for either how long this series goes, or if they advance here, and I know they'll have a lot of time off for him to get right if they do win in 5 here. But that doesn't look great, especially with what we're talking about here. Like every opposing team's best player going down to this point against the Celtics here. He's going to play through whatever, you would think. But it is part of this conversation we're going to have here of, if it is Celtics, Mavericks, the duos here. It's going to be a big story in this series. Luka, MVP candidate, first team guy, one of the more wide-ranging offensive impacts in the league here. Kyrie, rejuvenated, fantastic. Some amazing halves from him during this playoff run. And then you got Brown and Tatum doing what they're doing. And Brown wins the East Finals MVP, which I'm thrilled about. I feel like it's overdue for him to get recognition like that, especially for what he's been doing on this run. And then Tatum, who started the playoffs a little slow, got going in this series here at different points, especially the game 3 on the road there. So how do you compare these duos? How much of the series will be about these duos and their ability to perform?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like I'm on First Take right now with this lower third. I mean, because they probably have already done this segment, even though the series isn't set yet.
I'm trying to think of the topic. We did a topic before First Take did. It was almost the exact. I'm going to have to think about it. Go ahead and answer this.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating, right? Because, I mean, if this is the matchup, it is juicy, baby. It's juicy. Obviously, the Kyrie against the Celtics, which has been well documented. Has he beaten the Celtics since stepping on Lucky?
10 straight.
Yeah, so there's that. Then there's Porzingis against his former team, and this might be my hot take of the show, so it's fitting with First Take. I think the Mavericks franchise, and this includes everybody, front office, coaches, players, has more animosity toward Porzingis than the Celtics do toward Kyrie. That's my read on it. Because when KP was in Dallas, he was obviously a little bit younger. It's been well documented how he and Luka didn't always mesh. And Porzingis has talked about that on other shows. I know he was on JJ Redick's pod talking about some stories where it just didn't really work out. And I think it's fair to say that maybe the folks in Dallas aren't surprised that Porzingis hasn't played much in the playoffs. So to me, that's a really juicy one. But as pertains to these duos, I mean, the differences are obvious where Luka and Kyrie are really not impactful defensively, although I do think they've been pretty good in the postseason. But from a reputation perspective, and mostly in reality, they're not the defenders that the Celtics guys are. The key is going to be in crunch time. And I think if you're the Celtics, a lesson from this Western Conference Finals has been if you go to the mats with Dallas down the stretch, you're going to have a bad time because they're 100% about it, and the guys around them complement them super well. And you don't want to get into a situation where you're switching that pick and roll with Luka because we've seen what happens. I think Horford is obviously a little bit more nimble on the perimeter than Gobert, but Al has struggled in pick and roll coverage in these playoffs.
That's the biggest worry for Boston going into the series, I think.
Especially, dude, that's the thing. If Porzingis isn't 100%, I love Al, and he's had moments of brilliance in these playoffs, but you don't want to go into a series like this where your only 5-man really is in year 17 against the most active duo of centers in the NBA. You just don't want that. And against two guys who will absolutely dice you in the pick and roll. So if Luka and Kyrie can do enough to get it where it's within 5 points with under 5 minutes to play, the Celtics could be in trouble because, look, that's been the problem for this team in the past. I think the clutch stuff has been overblown this season. If you look at their clutch numbers, the Celtics are in the top 5 of basically every category. But we have seen a few times where the offense will stagnate. And the Mavs offense is not going to stagnate. So to me, the Celtics' best path to victory here is putting them away early and not having to worry about those clutch moments down the stretch.
Yeah, it's a good point on that. And I think that from a scheme perspective is going to be the most interesting thing in this series, how Missoula handles that. And to this point, his thinking has been give up the 2s, don't give up the 3s in that spot. So I do think that, they're going to probably lean in on giving up some of those dump off alley-oop passes, but it's dangerous. You saw it in this series. Like Siakam took all the 2s you gave him. Nembhard took all the runs to the rim you gave him, and it got a little dicey in some of those games, but the math usually worked out down the stretch. So I actually do like Missoula's ability to handle that, and we'll get into him a little bit later, but you mentioned Kristaps. I generally think they need him here. You mentioned the Al stuff. The depth has come through to some degree. Like Luke's had his moments. I thought Tillman gave them a little something at the end of that series. Brissett had his game.
Yeah.
But I think they've gotten what you're going to get out of that group. Like Al's been incredible. He's had the moments with less rest where he hasn't looked as good. And then the depth guys are more matchup dependent here. So going against this front court, especially if Lively's in play here, I mean, it's a dynamic duo in there. And then you throw in Washington into that mix too, who's able to hit those corner threes there. It's a pretty daunting physical group that you're going against there. So I think you're going to need him at the very least to prevent this series from going 6-7 and being in doubt here. You're going to need some version of that Porzingis that you saw throughout the year. And he had some struggles early in that first round series as well. You almost wonder if he was starting to already decline a little bit physically before the injury there. And you mentioned it's stretched on here. Not a ton from Joe. I think just Joe being Joe on the update stuff here. I don't really have a good sense of where it's at otherwise. But they have a lot of time going into this series, and he'll be 5.5 weeks out from the injury at that point. So to me, again, without any info here on my end, I'd be surprised if he's not ready for game one.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. We heard the report that he'd be ready potentially for a game 4 in Indiana. Now the verbiage, and that was from Woj, by the way, the verbiage on the injury reporting has been bizarre. Like, had you ever heard the terminology minimum of at least several games until Kristaps Porzingis and his calf injury? I had never heard that. And to me, it seems, by the way, what does that even mean? It seems like, and I was doing Sports Center the day after that report came out. I was doing the morning show and I was writing that script, and it was like 4 a.m. We were doing the morning show. So I just copied and pasted that exact line, a minimum of several games, from the report into the script. And one of our producers was like, Drew, a minimum of several games? What does that mean? And I was like, you're right. I didn't even think about that. What does that mean? So I changed the script a little bit. And I think I just put several games, which is still pretty ambiguous. But, the reporting seemed to be that he might be ready for a game 4 if they felt like they needed him. I don't know. I have no inside intel. To me, I think I expected them to try to get him in one of those games against Indiana just to see how he responded to live game action, so you don't throw him back into the fire in the NBA Finals after over a month away. But with just how that series played out, maybe they thought, hey, look, we can finish this off without him, and it's better to get him that rest. I don't even know really what he's been doing.
So Joe went on the radio this morning and said he's been doing stuff off to the side at shoot-arounds. Hasn't participated in the shoot-arounds through this last series. And, of course, they're not practicing at this point through these finals. So I don't think he's practiced yet to this point either. But he's progressing. He's starting to do more and more out there in those individual workouts. So finally, a little something from Joe this morning. Credit to the 98.5 guys who are the only ones who seem to get him to talk.
Yeah. But and we've seen that a little bit at shoot around, right? Like he's moving around, he's doing some stuff. Scal has said, like, for the ramp up process, you probably want to get him in some short bursts, like a 3-minute scrimmage, maybe some shooting drills, and then a couple sequences. So up and down the floor with, running the pick and pop, and then defending a pick and roll, and then, shooting on the other side and stuff like that. And the good thing is, Bobby, we got over a week to ramp up. But obviously it's different trying to simulate a live game versus actually playing in one, especially against a team like Dallas, where he's going to be asked to do a lot. And Porzingis, I think the reason he's so important in this series is not necessarily what makes him the unicorn. I don't think the 3-point shooting is his biggest role here. It's protecting the rim and disrupting that pick and roll where Lively or Gafford or Jones even are diving to the rim. And the Celtics just need a little bit extra rim protection and rebounding against a team that's really big and super active. So they're going to ask him to do a lot. Maybe it's a thing where we see him on like a minutes limit in the finals, which feels weird to say. Just like it's kind of weird to say you got to get him ramped up in the Eastern Conference Finals. But that's where we are. I'm with you, man. I think he's key for this series. Yeah,
and that's the thing. I love Cornet to death, but having Porzingis out there, whatever percent he is better than having, Luke out there in this series in particular. Again, I think there's certain matchups where Luke can excel, but this is more of a Kristaps series, especially if you want to challenge their opposing bigs with his floor stretching even, because that's another factor in having him out there is just him coming out of that pick and pop will pull guys up. So that's a benefit. And
And the
then,
Mavs are great defensively. Ever since the deadline, they've been a great defensive team. And we
yeah,
know how important Porzingis is to the offense.
yeah, a
So,
lot of size. But yeah, and if he is limited, you're able to play two styles there too. Because the one thing with him out, they've been able to play a little faster. I mean, this series, the way they played with pace against Indiana, I was actually surprised they embraced the pace of that series, and they ended up being the better team, the more controlled team, playing fast than Indiana was, who especially in those Boston games was just turning the ball over like crazy.
yeah.
So that's a benefit if you don't have them out there, I guess. But I think the size, the ability to drop back, take away the rim from some of those centers in certain possessions. And that's, I feel like that's going to be the answer if you do want to negate that pick and roll a little bit, is just to have a guy back. But at that point, you're letting Luka and Kyrie step into threes. You mentioned a little bit Dallas not being surprised that he's missed this amount of time, the several games. And then, just sort of the ramp up here for him. It's weird to me, right? Because they've been so good without him. And it felt like a lot of the explanation for why things were different this year was, oh, you went out and got Kristaps, and here's this piece that changed everything. And then, they've played at this high level throughout the playoffs without him here. So let's say he doesn't play and they still win the championship. It's going to be weird. Like,
I know.
because like he was the difference maker for a lot of this year. He goes down, they're 12-2 without him. They get all these benefits the other way. So I guess that's part of the explanation there, is that the other teams have just gotten even more injured than Boston is here. But I feel like they need him. I do. And it's tough that you go out, he's this healthy all year, you rest him this much, and he's pretty much gone the whole postseason here. And there's still some question going into the finals of whether he's going to be available, because this was obviously the risk when you went out and got him, right? And
Yeah.
the Mavs are sitting there, as you mentioned, and saying, like, now you know how it was for us on that side.
Yeah. And I would just say to anybody who thinks that we don't need Porzingis in the finals, without him, to me, the Celtics are a lot like the Thunder in this respect. Super deep, really good on both ends of the floor, good in transition, good in half court, but a little bit undersized. And think about OKC. They've got really one center in Chet Holmgren, and his weakness is his lack of girth, right? Think about the Celtics, how they're currently constructed without KP. One real center in Al Horford, and both those guys are more like fours than fives, but they play center for their team. And his weakness, quote unquote, which hasn't really impacted him mostly in these playoffs, is his age and all the tread on the tires. And if you look at how that series unfolded, Mavs Thunder, OKC's lack of size and lack of depth in the front court really hurt them, especially like we talked about against those two big guys from Dallas. So to me, I do think we need Porzingis for the finals, but you're right. It would be kind of weird, especially if especially you think about whom the Celtics gave up to get Porzingis. I think that would. I'm sure. Like, no one's going to be upset if the Celtics win it all, but I'm sure some Celtics fans will be like, "Damn, like Marcus should be here." Like, it's not fair. The guy we got didn't even play. So that part of it would be kind of strange.
Yeah, for sure. And that actually does bring me to our next conversation here, because I don't want to pile on Smart, but I do think there was one benefit to him not being here this year. There's your tease, Sports Center style.
Nice. Coming up.
Yeah, we are brought to you by great sponsors like Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com with the championship series coming up here. And even this West Finals continuing along here every night. Go over there, pick two guys for your daily fantasy team. Pick more or less on their projections, and you got yourself a team. And you can get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Win many times your picks here with Prize Picks. Head over there. It's fun. I love just going in there and seeing what they think guys are going to do on any given night, stat-wise here. And then you basically just go with more or less on those projections. They're our official daily fantasy sports partner here at CLNS Media and the Garden Report, and we love them. So go over there, support them. Big reason we're able to cover the finals and do all this cool stuff here late into the postseason. Amazing sponsors like Prize Picks. So go check them out. I want to give a shout out to Game Time. You know, Drew, it's going to be hard to get in that building next week. It's going to be really hard. So if anyone's going to get you in there, it's going to be Game Time. Check out their app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first ticket purchase over there. There's also a lot of concerts going on this time of year. I know they just had Boston Calling here in Boston. You got events going on throughout the summer. They got you on everything. And the best time to do your search for your tickets is to right up until game time and even a little bit after. Maybe some people can't make the finals game. They just throw them on there, try to get what they can. And you got your $20 off code on your first purchase here too with CLNS. Of course, terms apply. Check out the Game Time app. So, you mentioned that Marcus is out the door. The thing that stuck out to me throughout this run, and one of my big questions coming into the year after they sent out Smart this summer, was who's going to take over that vocal role. And to me, it took a little while here, but Brown embraced it in a way that blew me away because he's a quieter guy, right? Like he keeps to himself, especially earlier in his career. I don't think he used his voice much, but to have these like mic'd up, scenes throughout these playoffs, I'm sure you've seen him, Drew, where he's like telling Tatum to like, go get Neesmith, go after him. And, I think there was another situation where he's like, you're big deuce, come on, let's go. Like those moments for a change from what we've seen from Jaylen in the past. And certainly his game went to another level here with him winning East Finals MVP. But in many ways, and I wrote this after game 4, and this isn't like the whole Tatum Brown thing to me, because I asked Tatum about this, and I feel like he thought I was going in this direction. But to me, it's like a different story. Like Tatum is the tone setter on this team from a game standpoint, from a skill standpoint. Like he's initiating possessions, he's the passer, all that stuff. But from like our urgency, voice, leadership perspective, I don't think there's any doubt that Brown has kind of taken that mantle and ran with it here.
Yeah, I agree. I was lucky enough to be right behind the bench for Game 5 against Cleveland. And I thought the two most vocal guys were Horford and JB. By the way, there was a great moment with Al Horford where it was in the first quarter and there was an out of bounds that the refs gave it to the Celtics. It was pretty clearly off of us. It should have been Cleveland's ball. And so Al knew they were going to challenge it. And the ball ended up with D White. He was sitting on the bench. And Al came sprinting over and clapped at him like, give me the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball. And Derek held it for like a split second. And that was enough time for them to cut that timeout and hit the challenge. And Al was pissed. It was so funny. It was really, really good. But you could see the leadership of Horford and D White. He kind of smiled afterward. He's like, I know I messed that up. That one's on me.
And Al has always filled that lane. And it brings me back to a moment before the 21-22 season where Ime's trying to pick captains. And that's like his big thing early on is, we're going to have 2 captains. And it's like, all right, 2 captains. Like, come on, you know what he's doing there. But then Smart comes out and he's like, we don't really need captains. We're grown men. And Tatum's like, I agree. And Brown's like, Al should be the captain. And Ime's just like, you know what? Never mind. We're not having captains. And so that's where the leadership dynamic was then. And now for those, of course, there's no captains and there's still that talk of like general leadership here and everybody having a voice. But to have Brown just kind of grasp that at this point, because Al's going to do that stuff you mentioned, right? But he's Al. Like, he's the 5th, 6th guy on the team. His role is a little smaller. Exactly. He's not the guy who's kind of changing games. And Smart is in a similar place where it's like he's going to grasp that vocal thing, but he's not like the tone setter on the court. And Tatum's still that here. But Brown's at least equal with him here, especially you see the postseason so far. Brown's been every bit as important, maybe more, as Tatum has to this point, at least statistically here. So to have a guy who's like his equal being that voice on the team, you have to listen. You have to embrace that voice. You have to take it seriously. And to finally have one of those guys take that on has been so important here, I think.
I'm really happy for Jaylen, too, getting that award. And I think it's one of the best things that could happen to the Celtics is having him win Eastern Conference Finals.
Were you surprised?
A little bit, yeah, because Tatum was better statistically. Tatum's assist numbers were huge, but JB shot better than 50% again, which is pretty much par for the course for him at this point. And he was better handling the ball than he has been in the past. So a little bit surprised. The thing that would surprise me the most, Bobby, is if you saw the voting, Holiday didn't get a single vote, which I was kind of
I was
surprised.
expecting one Drew vote. And maybe that
Which,
changes in game 4 there because that obviously comes into
yeah,
play. Because going into game 4, it felt even. And
yeah,
Tatum has that start,
with the
and then
three
Brown
J's.
finishes it. Yeah, and
Yeah,
he makes the game-winning pass in the series. He starts the series with the 2 game-changing plays in game 1. And
yeah,
honestly, no matter what happens from that point on, unless like Brown just kind of went in the tank and Tatum took over, it's hard to not look at a moment like that to start a series and say that changed the whole dynamic of the series, and that's why you're MVP.
right, right. I also think, not to get us off track here, but just getting this off my chest. Anytime we complain about, somebody not getting enough votes, or, this person should have been unanimous, it's crazy that they weren't. Let's remember that every person votes for themselves. You don't have, it's not like I have 100 points to give and I think Jaylen deserves 60 and Tatum deserves 30 and Drew deserves 10. No, you have one. So unless you disagree with the final result, there's no use in complaining about how we got there. You know what I mean? And that was pretty prevalent, I think, when Steph won the unanimous MVP, and then people not even getting a vote for all defense or MVP or whatever it is. I'm just saying I was kind of surprised that no one voted for Drew, because I thought he was certainly a candidate, and it would have been deserved if he did win it. But to me, watching these guys play, I totally agree with you. I think JB has really stepped into that leadership role, and I think it's a big reason why the Celtics were okay moving on for Marcus and Grant Williams, because those guys probably had the loudest voices in the locker room, and they clearly weren't the team's best players. And when you cut ties with those guys, there's a void that someone has to fill. And maybe it took a while for JB to step into that, but he's here now. And I do think he's the most vocal guy. Now, it's different from how other players do it. Like we talked about Edwards being mic'd up for game 4, and he's awesome. Like it's hard. I'm sure it's hard for those guys not to be positive and not to want to play extremely hard because of how Edwards is and his demeanor is, and what he's saying to his teammates. Like it's all positive. It's all super confident, even though they were down 3-0. This one might be a little bit different, but like you said, we've heard JB encouraging his teammates, and even Tatum, who you would think, like, why does Jayson Tatum need any encouragement from anybody? He's been top 5 MVP and first team All NBA. But I love hearing, JB reminding him who he is. And it's another exhibit of how those guys get along really well, despite what you may hear on certain television programs, like, oh, was Jayson Tatum not excited enough for Jaylen Brown winning Eastern Conference Finals MVP? That was, I think, a topic on a talk show today, which is just outlandish. If you actually pay attention, those guys seem to get along really well.
Yeah, they get along. I don't think they're best friends,
Yeah.
which I don't know if you have to be at that point. I've gotten mixed word on that throughout the year, and I know I got a lot of crap too, because at All-Star, Durant's talking about like, oh, the reason the Suns have worked is because me and Booker, we spend a lot of time off the court, and we best friends and this and that. And so I wrote that because I really don't think Brown and Tatum are like the greatest friends ever, which doesn't matter, does it not? I don't know. I still think that's up in the air. But I think they've worked on their games. I think they've worked on fitting together on the court. I think they've addressed the relationship and just kind of how they manage this team together. And that's what matters here. Like, you can't force being best friends,
Yeah.
and the reaction thing too, like, it comes down to like how you want Tatum to react to it, because he did congratulate Brown. He said it's a great recognition and that sort of thing. But there's not like an emphatic response to the question there. Like, and that's
Is
just
he
how
emphatic
Tatum
about
is.
anything, Bobby?
That's what I'm trying to say here is like,
Yeah.
he's never really going to pour his heart out there. Unlike Brown, who after game 3 is in the locker room, like, Tatum made some big plays. That was huge.
Right.
And, you'd love to hear Tatum say that, right, about Brown and be like, this is amazing. He got snubbed for All NBA, and this is the recognition he deserves, and this and that. That's what we want. But that's not who he is. And so it's just going to come down to, does that dynamic work? for them to win the championship here, and it seems like it does so far to this point. There's
Yeah,
some awkwardness on the court, but I don't think that's because of their relationship or anything like that. I think it's because like Kawhi and George and some of these other wing duos, they play the same position. There's a little overlap there sometimes, and it can be tough for them to play off each other because there's no like pick and roll combination with them or anything like that. So I think that's the whole Brown Tatum story there.
I totally agree. I am a firm believer you do not need to be best friends with your coworkers to produce great things. And if you look at NBA history, I feel like that's been the case. Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, I don't think those guys are, cheersing right now.
Well, that's the important thing, right? Because hating each other, as maybe those guys verged on, or Kobe and Shaq certainly reached, can be disruptive. And these guys don't hate each other, certainly here, which I think is the important thing, because that's what leads to breaking up. And to this point, I was going to position this to you because I'm trying to figure out where Tatum's at in his career, where he's going here. And they go to the finals 2 years ago. They lose. They don't get back the next year. And then along the way, you're thinking like, all right, are Tatum and Brown going to break up? Do they have to make some moves here to shake up this core? That sort of thing. And that's what the Thunder did, right? After they lost their finals when they were young and weren't ready yet. And that screwed them. And, you even look at some of the other like young duos. Like I kind of compare Halliburton and Fox to them too. Because like, you're kind of just floating along. You're not quite there yet. And then you just trade Halliburton for the hell of it. And, it gets you to the playoffs. But now you don't have like that star duo that's like has that championship level ceiling there. So they keep these guys together. They're back now. Looks like they can win a championship at this point. But you're still looking at the duo here and you're like, all right, Brown's rolling. Tatum's having some of these struggles earlier in the playoffs. And now Tatum's starting to come around a little bit. And we talk about the leadership dynamic here too. And it just kind of reinforces, if we're comparing Tatum to someone, in my mind, it's Durant. Because he's quieter. He has this great shot-making ability. I think Tatum's maybe even surpassed Durant a little bit as a playmaker at this point, which has been important because he doesn't have like that big ball dominant point guard here. And so I wonder who you're comparing Tatum to at this point in his career, and where he's going here, because I think it's Durant. He has this tone setter next to him. Maybe for Durant in Golden State, it was Curry, it was Draymond, and he's just able to go out there and make shots and make plays because you have these other tone setters around him. So that to me is where I see him at right now. And it's interesting just because he's slowly starting to come out of that slump a little bit here, which is important because I think he needs to play at a high level in the finals for him to win here. But he's got these other pieces around him that he can trust. And so who does Tatum need to be is kind of the question I'm getting at here, Drew. Like, does it change every night? Does he need to be that scorer? Does he need to be the guy who just does it all and maybe isn't like the big scorer every night? Like, I think that's the question we've been asking the whole playoffs. Like, who is he? Who does he need to be?
Yeah, I think he's a tough one to come up with a historical comp for just because of how his career's unfolded. Joining a really good team as the third pick, and I know they weren't this good when he first got in the league, but being part of a good team and one with championship aspirations as the third or fourth best player, and then evolving into the go-to guy on a championship level team. It's just, there aren't that many guys I feel like who have done that. And it's part of the reason why I think some of the discourse around his career is a little bit unfair, because he's a victim of his own success in a lot of ways, where it's like, this guy's, it feels like he's been around in the Eastern Conference Finals forever, but he's still only 26. And of course, his age has been a long running narrative. And hey, remember he's 19, or when he dunked on LeBron, hey, remember he's 20.
Yeah.
But I do think it's actually more important than ever to remember his age right now, because this is the time when your best player is supposed to start winning championships. I would challenge anybody who thinks Tatum has been disappointing, or whatever word you want to use, to go back in NBA history and find me a team where the best player was younger than 26. I think it's really hard to do. Even the best players in NBA history, they don't really, I guess, modern NBA history. Like you look at a Kareem, maybe. Yeah, Magic, but he wasn't even the best player on that team. Like Kareem
Right.
was at that point. Kareem with the Bucks, maybe. But Big O was on that team. So to
And
me,
guys come out of college later in that era and things like that because
yeah,
Tatum comes
exactly.
into the league at 19.
And the league was thinner. So it's different now. So I think you look since MJ, like people just don't really do that where they win a title when they're super young. So I think he's on course, man. I really do. And if he had entered as the alpha and everybody knew it with the Celtics team, then maybe people wouldn't freak out about every bad Tatum playoff performance.
Right. And so that's where I get a little stuck with him because,
Yeah,
like, does he know who he is? Does he know who he needs to be any given night? Or is it just going to change any given night? Because that's a tricky thing. Like, he's perfectly built to be a guy who, like, oh, I can get 15 rebounds tonight. That's my job. Oh, like the screening, that's my thing tonight. Like, I'm going to go do that. Maybe I'm like shooting 40%, but I'm doing all these other little things. And that's kind of been the story of his run so far, right? Because he hasn't been like a lethal,
yeah.
efficient scorer
But
through
he
this
can
run.
score 50 in a game 7.
He's capable of that. And
Yeah.
3-point shooting, like, it's not always there for him, but when it's there in droves. So it's not like he's Giannis or Jokic, who are a little more limited from three. But he's also not like Curry and Durant from three either, one of those like elite all time guys from out there. So like, I think that's the tough part with covering him is he's always like in a different place. And I don't think we've really ever seen like a superstar who that's their mold. Like he can do anything on the court and it's going to be something different every given night. But the scoring is what you look at because that's kind of who he came into the league as and who he built himself as. But it feels like he's kind of moving on from that. Like, unless Brown leaves here down, the next couple of years or like the dynamic of the team really changes, it doesn't feel like he's the kind of guy who needs to score 30 points a game anymore. He needs to trust and involve his teammates. He needs to be a passer. He needs to defend and he needs to do all these little things. And unfortunately for him, and I think this is probably the hard part that he's trying to balance right now, you don't get like all the glory for doing like little things or things that maybe don't even appear on the stat sheet. Like 30 points per game is what you gets you the glory. 50% shooting is what gets you the glory here. And maybe that's why he might have deserved the East Finals MVP here is because like Brown was the tone setter, right? Brown had the big moments. But if you look at MVP as you take this guy off the court, you're losing the most, it's undoubtedly Tatum just because he's impacting so many areas of the game here. So that's where I think Joe's done the best job this year is really getting Tatum to like internalize, do everything. Doesn't matter if you're shooting 40%. Doesn't matter if you have 30 points. If you do everything, we're going to be good. And it feels like he's internalizing and believing in that, which is huge.
And he did score 30 plus, I think, in 3 of the 4 Eastern Conference Finals games. So,
right.
And a lot of that was in overtime in game 1, but like that's the thing, Bobby, is game 1's a perfect microcosm of what you're talking about, where he was not great, scoring the ball for most of regulation. And then in overtime, he takes over and he's game 7 against Philly, Jayson Tatum. So I think you're right. He's evolved as a player where he's always been this dynamic scorer with a very deep bag, sometimes a bag that we don't want to see. Like we don't always want to see 10 seconds of dribbling into a step back, which looks really cool if you make it, but is a pretty low percentage shot. We don't always want to see that, but he's always had that. Now it's rounding out his game, better playmaker, doing more rebounding. I thought it was funny earlier this year when you were probably in the scrum when somebody asked him about potentially averaging a double-double, and JT was like, shit, I'm 6'9". Like I hope I can get 10 rebounds a game. And he was hovering around.
He's a great rebounder.
Yeah. And he when he's rebounding and leading the break, that's when he's at his best and when the team is at their best. And with the way that this group is assembled, he doesn't have to score 40. Like he doesn't even have to score 30 sometimes. So I think he's done a nice job allowing himself to, sink into this perfect mix where we've talked a lot about sacrifices all year and mostly with Al coming off the bench and Holiday shooting less. But Tatum's points per game was down a little bit this year too. So he's had to sacrifice as well. And without that, I don't think it would work as well as it has.
Absolutely. And in a week, they're going to get a chance to win their first championship here, which is pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to being back at the finals, being around it. It's a really cool atmosphere. Have you been around the finals yet, Drew?
No, this will be my first one.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It is pretty cool. So, want to give one more quick shout out here to our sponsor, PXG. Go over there. It's golf weather. It's golf season. Memorial Day
This
is
is the one I
past.
want, Bobby. Do I get a discount now?
I think this would fit you well, Drew. Are you a golfer?
Yeah, I play a little bit. I'll hit the
So
little white ball around sometimes.
I actually got the shirt right here. Hold on.
You have a PXG shirt?
Yes. So this is it right here. Really light, great feel. It's almost like one of those like gym workout shirts. And so
Nice.
you got like athletic like build to it, but it's loose, it's light, and it feels good in the heat. So you're going to be out there. It's going to be summer weather. You're going to want polos, tees, hats like this, skirts, whatever you want. It's over there at PXG. Great golf gear over there, but we're talking about their apparel. It's even great just to wear out in the summer weather. It all feels good. Caps as well. A lot of great stuff over there at PXG. So, Drew, anyone else can get 10% off their order when you use our code Garden Report. Go to pxg.com/Garden Report. A lot of cool designs too. I got the white one here, but a bunch of different colors, bunch of different designs over there. Again, use the code Garden Report to get a discount on all of their apparel over there at PXG. So let's turn the focus toward you a little bit here, Drew. How was year one?
By the way, just to put a bow on that, the best club in my bag is a 54-degree wedge from PXG that my dad got me for my birthday. So you know that they make quality stuff.
That's the thing. People know their clubs, people know that stuff, but they have cool apparel here too for the course as well. So check that out.
Yeah, but to answer your question, Bobby, the first season was a whirlwind, man. It was a dream come true. It was sick. It helps that the team is so good. I'm sure you'd feel the same way about this, but it makes the job more fun, more rewarding, and frankly, a little bit easier when the team is winning, especially in my role where, I don't technically work for the Celtics, but, part of NBC Sports Boston is owned by the Celtics. And, it's more fun to be around the guys when the team is winning. And you're always going to be honest with the viewer about how the team is performing. And when they're the best team in the league, there's not a whole lot to criticize. And that's always fun. So I'm grateful that the team was so good in my first season. And one of the most rewarding parts of it has been working with Scal and Abby and Eddie House and Cedric Maxwell when he comes on, Chris Forsberg, Tom Giles, Amina before she left. Like it's a really, really good group. So I feel like we have an amazing team covering an amazing team. And being part of that has been really, really cool. And the most important thing to me coming in, and we talked about this, was that Celtics fans could still enjoy watching the game and listening to the announcers, even though the end of an era is upon us with Mike leaving. So I hope that people feel like they can do that, and I hope they're ready and will embrace, Scal and me together, bringing them the stories of their favorite team, because that I don't take that lightly. I know how important it is. I know how much of a relationship the fans have with the announcer, specifically of this team. So it's really important to me that people can enjoy it.
That's what you're gearing up for next year, all 82 with Scal?
That is the plan, minus the 12 we lose for the national exclusive, because they take the max every year because everybody wants to watch the Celtics. People want to watch the Celtics so much that the national networks will still put our games on TV, even if we also have the local broadcast. But that's just how much the Celtics move the needle nationally. It's the team that you either love or you love to hate.
I guess what you make up for that is the first round of the playoffs that you get to do at that point. Yeah. So that'll be big for you this next year. Obviously, Gorman got to handle that this year in his finale. They had the big day for him, which was really cool. being in the building for that against the Wizards, I think, there for the finale. You said coming into this year you didn't want to like try to beat Gorman, and obviously you got to be around him a lot this year and listen to him and watch him closely and all those different kind of things as you kind of prepared to take over for him here. What was ultimately the benefit you feel like of being around him, talking to him, trying to feel out your style this year, but also learn from him and pull from things that, he was kind of doing there in his last year, however much you've watched him at this point?
Yeah, well, first of all, one of my favorite things about this season is how perfectly it all fell for Mike's farewell, where, his last regular season game, I thought the Celtics did a great job of celebrating him. And then his last game period was at home, finishing off a rival. And he got a chance to sort of say his final farewell. But obviously he's still around and still see him and Terry at the Garden, and met his granddaughter. So it's been really cool. I feel like everything has worked out as it should have, and the way that Mike deserved after everything that he's given to the team. And in terms of what I've learned being around him, Mike Gorman never forces anything. Mike Gorman lets it come to him. He's one of the coolest dudes you'll ever meet. And I think his approach to life, his warmth with everybody he meets and interacts with, and his focus on the other person as opposed to himself translates to what you hear on the air, where Mike will never make the game about himself. He'll never get in the way of the analyst or the sideline reporter. He was the perfect counterpart to Tommy, and I think Scal as well. I feel like that's translated. And that's what I've learned, Bobby, because, coming into this first season, being so new to the Celtics fan base, obviously I want people to like me. And I think there are probably times where I did force it, wanted to hit that perfect call, have that moment where Celtics fans embrace me. You can't force that. It's got to happen organically. And so I've picked that up, watching Mike, being around him, listening to him on the broadcast. And I think that's going to be a really, really good lesson. And hopefully I'm doing this as long as he did. That's truly my goal. So, maybe one day I'll hit a point where I can look back and say, the fans like me and enjoy listening to me because I didn't try too hard to achieve those goals, because that's the best way to do it.
One of our commenters mentions this too. I wasn't going to hit on this, but obviously we lost Bill Walton yesterday, another broadcasting icon, along with all the other great things he did in his basketball career there. Did you ever cross paths with Bill during the years, even at ESPN there, or did you just kind of enjoy him as a viewer?
Yeah, I never met Bill. I do work for ESPN. I've been there for about 3 years now, but I never met Bill. I have a lot of mutual friends, like all the Cuse guys. Obviously, Dave Pash is a friend.
Yeah.
Jason Benetti's a good friend. And so I've talked with them a little bit the past couple days. And I think even if you didn't know Bill Walton personally, you can still be inspired by how he lived. All the stories, and listening to those guys and Jackie McMullen and Charles Barkley and Shaq and everybody, they talk about the joy he had for life, and how he loved other people. And I think all of us can have a little Bill Walton inside of us, where people say they walked away from a conversation with him feeling better about themselves and better about the world. And I think Bill probably did a better job than anybody of letting that out and putting joy into the world. And I think we can all do a little bit more of that. So the last couple of days, I've been thinking, like, if something frustrates me, like I did an early pregame show for Game 4, and I sucked. And I thought it was one of the worst shows I've ever done, and I was pissed. And I did a really bad job of responding to it, like I was upset. And then I was thinking, like, damn, I should be a little more like Bill Walton right now. I should be grateful for the opportunity and excited about the next one, as opposed to letting it get me down and affecting how I treat people around me. So Anyway, I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn from his life.
Yeah, absolutely. Rest in peace, Bill Walton. Should be a lot more great tributes to come. Definitely recommend people go look at Rick Carlisle's pregame from
Yeah.
the game 4 as well. A lot of good stories there and everywhere else. Drew Carter, thanks for being here. Great to recap your first season and look ahead to the finals here. I'm sure we'll cross paths along the way. And shout out to our guy, O'Shea Brissett, who I guess is, if he gets into the finals here, going to be the first Syracuse player to play in the finals in 44 years.
Is that actually true?
I think so. So Dion Waiters was there with the Lakers in 2020. So this is where I get a little confused. He didn't play. So it has to be like played in the finals, I guess. And it's possible. O'Shea could get in there if Porzingis is out
Yeah,
at the
stay
start
out
of
for the
it.
first game, KP, or just don't play the first half so O'Shea can get a few minutes.
That's been pretty cool this year. Obviously having you here along for the ride, but also O'Shea
Yeah.
being on the team as well as a real Syracuse presence on this
Bobby,
team.
look at this. I recently ran into this photo on my phone the other day. This is from November of 2019. For those watching who don't know, Bobby and I were in school when O'Shea was there. So, like, I sort of knew the guy at Syracuse, and now we get to cover him 5 years later. I found this photo. It's in
Yeah.
reverse, but I think the official Cuse MBB account put this out, and I was like, that's dope. I'm going to make that my wallpaper. Now it's my dog, but this is a cool photo.
I got a good one too. He was on the New York Daily News cover when they beat Michigan State. Xavier Tillman's Michigan State.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was on the. Hold on. He was on the cover here.
That's so good. That team was fun, man. That Sweet 16 run. Woo.
Yeah, Tyus Battle, Elijah Hughes, who's a guest here a lot.
Yeah.
What a good guys from that team.
Marek
Fun
Dolezaj.
to watch. One of my favorite players ever, Marek
Yeah.
Dolezaj. I'm bummed he didn't get a shot at the G League or NBA or whatever, but I guess he's doing good overseas. So
God, he'd be a great Celtic, wouldn't he? The fans here would love him.
Yeah, obviously everyone remembers his charge take on
Yes.
Zion that almost killed him.
I know.
Fun times, man. Fun times. Great having you here. Great talking to you, Drew. We'll catch up after the final, see how this goes. Appreciate you taking the time here. And of course, congrats on year 1 and good luck to all the years ahead for you here in Boston.
Thanks, buddy. Always a pleasure. See you soon.